Our goal in this entire design effort, in that first round of meetings where we heard concerns and opportunities, in the work our team did working together to come up with design responses for this, in the alternatives we presented to the community in the second round of meetings, was to reduce the negative impacts and increase the benefits of this project. We've identified a whole series of ways to do that: dedicated two-way transit lanes, frontage roads designed as city streets, safe ped bike crossings and keeping as many of those crossings as possible, opportunities for freight rail grade separation and relocation, flood mitigation on Halls Bayou, White Oak Bayou, programs for displaced residents and to ensure that the affordable housing supply is not reduced, and design exceptions to reduce displacement. That said, having done all of that, we set out to reduce those impacts, increase those benefits. We concluded that we could not do that simply by refining the project. If you look at the draft environmental impact statement, it stated that all alternatives would cause disproportionate high and adverse impacts to minority or low-income populations. And those are directly as a result of the widening of the highway. This is a project which would significantly widen the freeways that it touches. In segments 1 and 2 north of downtown, typically a 50% increase in footprint. That's 150 feet of additional highway width. And that directly leads to significant displacements. These are the DEIS numbers. You can see segment 1, 58 single family homes, 160 multifamily homes, 242 businesses with a total of 23,000 employees. Segment 2, 63 single family, 38 multifamily, 22 businesses. These are very significant impacts that are due directly to the widening of the highway. And we asked in that second round of public meetings, what's your preference for capacity and cross-section? And what we heard as an overwhelming response was the public saying, we want you to look at alternatives to fitting within the existing right-of-way of this highway. So we looked at multiple options for doing this, and all of them ultimately come down to a trade-off between 3 significant goals. One goal is adding capacity to the highway. One goal is bringing the highway up to current design standards. And one goal is minimizing displacements and neighborhood impacts. If you look at TxDOT's statement of goals, their primary goals here are adding capacity and increasing safety, which is taken to mean bringing the project up to current design standards. We came at this saying there is really a third goal here. It is protecting and enhancing neighborhoods. And what we did based on all of this input is say, what version of this project does that? And we think there's an alternate vision for segments 1 and 2 that can accomplish all 3 of these things: increasing the capacity of the highway, increasing safety, and having minimal displacement. So first of all, how do we increase capacity? First of all, rebuilding interchanges is an increase in capacity. Every time you have a left hand on an off ramp, every time you have merge lanes which aren't long enough, every one of those serves as a sort of bottleneck on the entire system. So bringing interchanges up to modern standards increases capacity. Secondly, rebuilding on and off ramps so that there are, once again, proper merge lanes, good geometry for those on and off ramps increases capacity. Adding shoulders increases capacity, especially if there is a crash and cars are able to pull over on there. We know that segment 3 serves as a bottleneck for this entire network. So segment 3 can actually help capacity in segments 1 and 2. Adding transit capacity and more transit service adds capacity, and giving more people access to transit adds capacity. 40% of the delay on the system is actually due to crashes. So you can see there's a strict relationship between safety and capacity. And Metro Next is proposing significant new transit service in this area. So what we suggested for segments 1 and 2 is a new vision which attempts to stay within the current right-of-way, which adds no single occupant vehicle capacity, but which converts the current reversible HOV into a two-way all-day transit lane. Overall, that's actually adding 78% to the people capacity of the highway without adding to the number of single occupant vehicle lanes. And part of that is thinking about those lanes in the middle. We think that looking at transit-only lanes as opposed to HOV lanes, as opposed to managed lanes, can lead to more reliable transit service, can lead to simpler on and off ramps. It makes it simpler to add stations along the way so that the neighborhoods benefit from that transit, and it can be built at lower cost with less right-of-way. But this vision isn't just about what happens with the highway main lanes. It's also what happens next to the highway. We said that the frontage roads along I-45 should be seen as parts of the neighborhood rather than as parts of the freeway. That means they are designed to city street standards, not highway standards, that they have safe pedestrian and bike facilities, not bike sharing lanes with cars, that they have more extensive landscaping, and even that sound walls are located next to the main lanes and between the main lanes and the frontage roads rather than between frontage roads and houses, which clearly makes those frontage roads part of the neighborhood and also means we have fewer gaps in those sound walls, which means they can be more effective. And so that is the vision that the mayor's letter puts forward. Keep the current number of main lanes in segments 1 and 2. Replace the current reversible HOV lane with two-way transit lanes. Add intermediate BRT stations so that the neighborhoods along the way benefit from that new transit service and so that local bus routes can have connections to that BRT. Bring exits and interchanges up to design standards, provide full inside and outside shoulders, and have the frontage roads typically be 2 lanes designed as city streets. So looking at that vision, how does that compare? Ultimately, it does not provide the same vehicular capacity that the TxDOT design does, but ultimately can provide more person capacity. In that more vehicular capacity, it may not do as much or will not do as much in terms of travel time for cars, but it does more for transit reliability. Both versions can really address the freeway flooding. We think ultimately widening the freeway less and incorporating more flood control features as part of the highway can mean that we can reduce neighborhood flooding as well. And clearly, this alternate vision uses less right-of-way, fewer residential displacements, fewer commercial displacements, and ultimately would be a less expensive project to build. And if we look at the goals that TxDOT started with, we would argue that this actually addresses those goals, though sometimes in different ways. That when we're adding capacity, if we think of capacity in person capacity rather than vehicle capacity, this is actually a way to add capacity. So we think this alternate vision is a project which would be a significant improvement over the current highway, as well as an improvement over what TxDOT has proposed.